So before you open your eyes, let's just do a little meditation on the topic that we're learning about in these classes. So each of us has a mind. Our mind is that part of us that knows or experiences or is aware of things. And it's going constantly, 24 hours a day, nonstop. Mind is always doing something, knowing something, experiencing something. But it's changing all the time. It's not like a fixed thing. It's more like a stream or river made up of momentary mental events or mental states. And these are somewhat like bubbles in that they arise, they last a short time and then pass or disappear. Although they're actually much briefer in duration than bubbles. They're very, very short, arising and passing, arising and passing. And there's no gap between one mind bubble and another. So it can seem as if the mind is just this kind of solid, fixed thing. But when we look more carefully, we can see momentary changes, different experiences arising and passing, arising and passing. And then each of these mind moments or mind bubbles can be broken down into parts. Each one consists of a main mind or primary mind, which functions just to know the general presence or existence of the object. There's always an object. Mind can never exist without an object. So there's always an object that is known, that is experienced. And there's 6 different kinds of primary minds or main minds that know 6 different types of objects. So the first 5 of these are related to our senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling with our body, tactile sensations. And then the 6th type of mind is what we call a mental consciousness. So that includes our thoughts, our memories, our emotions, fantasies, dreams when we're asleep. So the main mind, that part of each mind bubble just knows the existence of its object. For example, when we hear a sound, the main mind just knows there's a sound. It experiences the sound, but it doesn't go into details. It doesn't sort of know or experience detailed aspects of the object. So that is the function of mental factors. So each mind bubble, mind moment, in addition to having a main mind, a primary mind, it also has a number of mental factors. So these are also aspects of the mind, and each one of them has a different function in relation to the object. So, for example, feeling. Feeling is always there. There's always a feeling with every moment of experience. The feeling experiences the object as either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. So when we hear a sound, there's always a feeling together with that. We experience the sound as a pleasant sound, or as an unpleasant sound, or just neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So that's a mental factor that experiences that feeling tone of the object. Another mental factor, which we call discrimination, notices distinguishing features or characteristics of the object that enable us to know more about the object and differentiate one from another. So, for example, with sounds, so there's different kinds of sounds. So discrimination is able to discern, oh, that's a voice. And then within that, a human voice or an animal voice, like a cat or a dog or a bird. Or it would know if the sound is something made by a machine, like a mechanical noise, like a car motor or a photocopying machine. Or a sound in nature, like rain falling or thunder or the wind rustling trees. So when we're able to differentiate one type of sound from another, that's the mental factor of discrimination. There's many other mental factors as well. Some of them are virtuous and positive, constructive. Some are negative or harmful, destructive. So mental factors are incredibly important because they determine whether our mind is in a positive state or a negative state or a neutral state. They determine whether our actions, our behavior, become positive or negative or neutral. And thus what kind of karma we create and what kind of experiences we'll have in the future, happy or unhappy. And then in terms of the spiritual path, the spiritual practice, if we aspire to attain higher states of mind, such as nirvana, enlightenment, as well as the different realizations along the path, like calm abiding, the wisdom realizing emptiness, then it's the mental factors that enable us to achieve those higher states of mind and ultimately reach liberation, reach enlightenment, and then be able to help others. So this topic of mental factors is very, very important. It's emphasized in all traditions, all schools of Buddhism. We need to be able to recognize which mental factors are positive and try to increase those, which ones are harmful, and work on decreasing those. And we do this for our own benefit, for our own happiness and spiritual growth, but also for the benefit of others, so that we don't do things that are harmful to others, and instead do things that are helpful to them and help them to develop their positive potential and eventually reach enlightenment. So try to make sure that your motivation for being here tonight and participating in this class is to benefit not only yourself, but all other beings, and to benefit in a short-term way, but also in a long-term way, to create the causes for all of us to eventually reach enlightenment, Buddhahood. Okay, so we've we've gone through some of the mental factors already, such as the 5 ever-present mental factors. And then last week we looked at the 5 object ascertaining mental factors. And then we started looking at the virtuous mental factors, the ones that are the cause of happiness and being able to make progress along the path up to enlightenment. And we only managed to do one so far, the first of the virtuous mental factors, which is faith. And so we pretty much covered the explanation of faith. So I think, is it Venerable Damcha? Did you send the files to everybody? So you should have received 2 files since last week. One is the translation of the text on mind and mental factors. It's the same as the one I sent you before, but it's just got a little note on the cover because we've been given official permission to use that file from the FPMT. And then the second file is a chart, and that chart is different than the one I sent you last week because it's the terminology. The language is in accordance with the translation of the text, so it's easier to use. So in the text of the by Yeshe Gelsen, which has a very long name, something like necklace. I can't remember the name. I always have these long names in Tibetan text. There's a definition for faith in there, which is quite nice, and it's also in the chart. The chart contains all the definitions as well. So there, faith is defined as a conviction, clarity, and wishing with respect to an existent that is endowed with excellent qualities and power. It has the function of acting as a support for aspiration. So when it says a conviction, clarity, and wishing, this is talking about the 3 types of faith, 3 different types of faith that we looked at last week. Conviction is the best one because that's coming from we've really thought about, analyzed, checked the object and come to a certainty, a conviction that it really is worthy of your respect and devotion and faith and so forth, rather than blind faith. So that's the faith we try to generate as much as possible. But the other types of faith are also positive, also beneficial. Also, the definition mentions the object is endowed with excellent qualities. So we talked about that last year. Last week, I threw out the question. If somebody has faith in some person or some object that doesn't really have good qualities, that might be very deluded and might be actually leading people down a wrong path and even to, into very negative things, is that faith? I think we agreed that it's not. So faith is only with respect to objects that really do have good qualities and are able to benefit us. And then it also mentions here power. And I was thinking, the word power can have different meanings. And maybe for some people it might have a bit of a negative connotation. When we say somebody's on a power trip, or, somebody, pushing their power onto somebody else. So it can have a negative connotation in some contexts. But here, it has a positive connotation because, for example, when talking about the Buddha and the qualities of a Buddha, one of the qualities of a Buddha is power. They use the word power. And there's a quotation here from volume 4, which hasn't yet been published, but that's the next of Venerable's books that will be published, and it has very extensive explanation on the 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and all their different qualities, and very beautiful. So in that book, it says the excellent quality of power is the Buddha's power of intuitive wisdom and compassion that liberates others. This indicates that Buddhas possess the complete range of abilities to clear away sentient beings' obscurations that force them to be repeatedly reborn in samsara under the control of afflictions and karma. Like a sword, a Buddha's wisdom and compassion have the power to cut the root of samsara. That doesn't mean the Buddha himself. We have to be clear about that. It's not that the Buddha is able to liberate us from samsara. We can't just make our disturbing emotions non-existent, but is able to teach us and guide us in whatever we need to do to be able to do that. So that's the main meaning of power. Having the power to help others to get completely out of suffering, out of samsara, and to enlightenment. And also there's long lists of all these different qualities of a Buddha. And one is a list of what are called 10 powers or 10 strengths. I'm not going to go through all of those, but they include things like knowing all the details of karma, being able to see everybody's karma, every sentient being's karma, what they've done in the past, what they're doing now, what they will do in the future. So seeing all the details of karma. And another of the powers is being able to see all the different capacities of sentient beings. So each person, has different strengths and weaknesses and abilities and inclinations. So Buddha is able to see each sentient being and know what that particular person's inclinations are, and in that way be able to teach them and guide them according to that. So anyway, that's just with regard to power. So when we learn more about a Buddha and the Buddha's qualities and abilities, powers, and so forth, then this can give rise to faith. So at the end of the class last week, I threw out the question that we could discuss tonight about how to generate faith in case we don't have it. For some people, it seems to arise quite easily, naturally, especially if you're, it's not the case for most of us, but people who are born into a Buddhist family or born into a Buddhist country, culture, society, they seem to be able to easily feel faith and devotion. I noticed that in Singapore. It almost seems like it's in their blood or in their genes, they're kind of born with it. It's not true for everybody, but a lot of people, they just have this natural faith and devotion. I'm sure in Vietnam as well, although maybe the communists kind of did a lot of damage to them. But anyway, so for those of us who don't have it naturally from birth, then we may sometimes have difficulty generating it. So I wondered if anybody had thought about that and came up with ideas on how to deal with that difficulty, that challenge of being able to develop or generate faith.
I think when I first, as a very young person, as a child, basically, saw on TV movie, I even can't say the name, I don't remember it now, but the girl there, she was orphaned and she took refuge in God and she prayed, and I saw the first time somebody praying, so to say. So I was a child myself, under 10 somewhere, and I thought, wow, this looks very good, and so what is that about? And then later when I met Buddhism in my 20s, and I read a book such as by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the wisdom that came through, I thought, wow, so this is, there's somebody who's really wise, and I really look forward to. And so then this kind of wisdom that seems to shine through the book was just kind of, for me, in a way, blind faith, but it was very appealing. It had for me, some kind of truth I was looking for a long time. So then I was basically reading like crazy, and also exploring meditation. And that was a key then when I had personal experiences, and that strengthened the so-called blind faith in the beginning, and it became more convictional faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also Venerable Nima's BBC talk yesterday. I thought that's a good illustration of how to generate faith. Because in Buddhism, faith isn't just in some person like the Buddha or the Dalai Lama, but it's also in doctrines, teachings, for example, the Four Noble Truths. That's something we can have faith in. And practices such as purification, meditation, calm abiding, that these practices are genuine, are valid, are efficacious, and that will give us the motivation to want to do them. So I think that was a really good example of how we can generate faith by just trying it out, experimenting with it and seeing what happens. And you saw, yeah, this really does have benefit. So then you felt, enthusiastic about continuing to do it. So that's much better than doing something because a teacher tells us to do it, or because the group is doing it and we want to be part of the group and not stand out, those kind of reasons. So if it's coming from our own experience, I think that's probably the type of faith that's called the faith of conviction, the faith of belief, the really strong one. Because then you want to keep doing that practice even on your own, when nobody's telling you to do it, or there's no other people around doing it. You do it because you know it's good for you. Sangye.
But for me, I didn't even know I was interested in Buddhism until I went to my first class. And for me, it was watching venerable children model the teachings. Role models really make huge impacts on me, whether they're good impact, good influence, or not good influence. So to watch her, because I didn't do a lot of reading before I walked into that center, but to watch her explain and tell the stories of her life on how things became real and true for her, then it started generating some curiosity in my own mind. And then just watching her like a hawk. I mean, I just watched how she walked, how she related with us, how she led the retreats, and she just embodied a lot of the qualities that I found inspiring and somewhat lacking in myself, particularly when it came to ethical conduct and being considering other people. So she got me inspired that if this person behaves like this due to these kind of teachings, then let me go see if that can apply to someone like me.
Mm.
So I really needed to have it modeled, because I didn't even know what the Buddha Dharma was until I met her.
Yeah, that reminds me of my experience when I first went to India, went to Dharamsala. Because I'd traveled through quite a few countries before that, and observed people who were practicing other religions, but I wasn't very impressed. Then when I got to Dharamsala and I saw the Tibetan people, especially the lamas, and just the way they were, just the way they behaved, the kindness, the dedication to spiritual practice, the ethics, and so on. And also even just the ordinary Tibetan people, just even people building the roads and, very poor, simple people. But I just saw there was so much kindness and joy. And I thought, wow, this is coming from their practice. I want to know about that. I want to do that. So, yeah, that's another source of faith.
I think also the paying attention to the yearning inside for something somewhere that's going to take a person away from the suffering. I think there's a yearning in there that if we pay attention to, it'll lead us to a belief system or a religion or a something. So I think from one's own side to pay attention to that heart yearning. I want something that's going to bring some ease here. I think that's can be quite strong, even if you have no idea what, you know.
But it just popped into my mind because today I was reading a news story, the BBC, about cults. Because there was this cult that just in New York City, but they also had people talking about other involvements in cults. And there was one woman who said she went to she had this kind of yearning, you know, for peace and for happiness. And she went to this group and they were doing some weird things, but she felt this wonderful experience. And then she found herself in that group and it ended up to be a cult. So just having that yearning and getting some nice experience, you know, we still have to check and make sure this person or this group or this process or whatever is really a valid one. Otherwise, it could lead us into some very unwholesome and, horrible experiences. That's it.
Well, there are many types of faith, and I appreciate that in the Lam Rim, often the topics will point us towards the benefits of something. And for me, that's been a really strong tool for developing that movement towards, you know, aspiring to have a certain quality or a certain understanding myself, and then actually making the effort to bring about that quality or that understanding.
Yeah, like the benefits of patience or fortitude versus the disadvantages of anger. Yeah, it is very helpful to do that kind of contemplation. If I do this, this will come about. If I do this, this will come about. So you compare that. And
similar to the point on role modeling, I was very moved the first time I ever went to a Buddhist temple because I grew up without a religion and I was quite anti-religious for most of my youth. But I was the first time I went to Pokaksi temple, it was to have a free meal, and I was just surprised they offer free food to people all day, and to watch the people who brought me there, they ate every single drop, and I used to waste a lot of food, but just seeing they embody this value of cherishing what is given, and just observing that the temple has this big recycling area in a country that doesn't really like to recycle, that they were committed to putting these values into practice. And it was slowly like that. And I met Buddhists who would spend 15 minutes moving the snail from one place to another so it wouldn't get crushed. Wow, that's so different from how I live my life. I want to move in this direction. Just watching that it could be possible. And there was a whole institution supporting it. Gave me a lot of inspiration.
Mm. Yeah, I remember that too. When I first went to Dharamsala and I was going to classes at the Tibetan library, and I had a room near the library, and so I would go walks around there. And one day the teacher, the Lama, Geshe Yamandarge, every day he would do a circumambulation around the library because there were lots of holy objects inside. So he was walking around and around. So I was watching him one day, and at one point he stopped, and there was like a little worm or some kind of little insect on the ground, and he stopped and he picked it up very carefully and moved it over to the grass. I'd never seen anybody do that before. I was like, wow, amazing. I was so touched. And he's this high Lama. He sits up on a throne. Everybody bows to him. You know, everybody looks up to him. And he's humble enough to stop and pick up a little insignificant insect and take care of it. So that just really blew my mind. And of course, I wanted to try to emulate that as well. But yeah, so again, seeing how people behave, how people act in this faith, in this religion, that can really inspire us to want to be part of it too.
Regarding the yearning, but there's also something, maybe some of us have this experience, but wanting to be within yourself, be okay, be feeling safe and not in control, but something like a certain power, you know. I don't know if other people had this experience too when they have been a child, but feeling like you don't have anything to hold on to. And when you then find certain faith beliefs, there's something that, that extends what you ever have met. So touching to, I think to the mentioning the yearning of what is this yearning? Where does it come from? Probably different reasons, but I think one of them could be, that we know there's something in us that can be developed, and we don't need to be dependent on outside experiences.
Mm.
One thing that came to mind for me was actually working with doubt helps me with my faith, actually, to recognize doubt for what it is and not to get kind of taken apart from that by doubt. And then also to then be able to, which kind of doubt sometimes can emotionally sidetrack you or undermine what you're trying to do. But then by staying with that and working it through, then you actually have a lot of faith because you've worked through things that you have trouble with. And I find that initially some of the other things people mentioned were really a part of it for me. But what came to mind, and I think what is strong for me now, is that's one part of it, the removal of things that get in the way, not just the building up of things like role models, which I find completely helpful, and my own experience, which of course is number one thing probably, but part of that is taking out things that are in the way.
Yeah, I was going to say something about doubt too, because I tend to have a lot of doubt. And in the past, I think I felt some shame and embarrassment and, like I was a bad person if I had doubt, especially if you're around people who are very devotional, and they're really, like that, And if you have some doubt, then you feel like, oh, something's wrong with me. So I used to feel that way and, really tried not to have doubt and tried to have faith and so on. But it would still come up sometimes, and I would feel bad about that. And talking to a friend, another nun who's a friend of mine, I realized that I had a sort of very black and white view of it. Like either you have faith or you have doubt. There's no in between, And I realized that's not true. That all of these mental factors, they're just mental factors, and they're transitory. They come and they go. So faith comes and goes, doubt comes and goes. And just because doubt arises in the mind doesn't mean your faith has been totally destroyed and it will never come back and you never even had it to begin with. This is what I used to think, like a moment of doubt sort of wipes out any faith you ever had. So it was really helpful to think of that, to think of the impermanent nature of these states of mind, and they do come and go. And I also find, if you don't just get stuck in the doubt, but use it to investigate, to analyze, then you come out stronger. And I was really happy when I studied the Ornament of Clear Realizations, because I mentioned this the other day. They talk about these two kinds of followers, two kinds of disciples. One is called a follower of faith, and this is the kind of person who just immediately feels this faith and wants to jump in and start practicing without really checking carefully. And the other kind of person is called a follower of fact or a follower of reasoning. And this is somebody who actually has doubt initially. When they hear about the path to enlightenment, they think, is that true? They actually don't immediately believe it. They want to check it out, and they do. They investigate it. And through their investigation, they do come to a point where they feel, yes, this is valid, and I want to follow it. So they actually say the second type of person is actually preferable. That way is preferable than the first one. They're kind of stronger. They're more sharp facultied than the first one. So that kind of made me happy to hear that it's not bad. It's not bad to have doubt. And His Holiness says that too, all the time. That I think he's trying to discourage the Tibetans from just having this blind faith and whatever the Buddha says, whatever the Lama says is true. He says we have to be 21st century Buddhist. Think, study, investigate, have doubt, question. This is good, this is important. As long as we don't get stuck in it. Because it can be very debilitating.
My BBC tomorrow is about this topic.
Okay.
So I'm going to give away the conclusion, which is, I think that compassion is the source of faith, or at least my faith, because what attracted me to Buddhism was this wish to be rid of suffering, which, that yearning just to be free of the suffering. I know directly, I know for a fact I suffer and other people suffer. And the wish to get rid of it leads to the search for what will work, what works, what doesn't work. And in that process, you learn certain things and your wisdom grows, and then eventually you have faith in the techniques that you've discovered. You can also use reasoning. If somebody explains something to you and that makes sense, you can try it out. But I think, personally speaking, when I heard about the Four Noble Truths, what really got me was the first one. It was the truth of suffering. I said, this is absolutely true. And then I was able to have faith in the other ones, just because that first one was so in line with my own experience. But yeah, I think just our condition of wanting to be rid of suffering, that will lead us to have hope and to have aspiration and to have faith in things that will get rid of it.
Anyone else? Otherwise we can move on. We have 10 more to go. I thought we might finish tonight, maybe not. Okay, the second of the virtuous mental factors is integrity. I really like that translation, I have to say, because most other texts, they translate it as sense of shame, which can have different meanings. So integrity is a very good term. Okay, so on the file that I had sent you, it says, integrity avoids negativity for reasons of personal conscience. It enables us to restrain from harmful physical, verbal, and mental actions, and is the basis for ethical conduct. So I'll just read what Geshe Rapton says about this. Here it's called self-respect. That's not too bad. So he explains it in the same way, but then he gives some examples. Examples of self-respect or integrity would be as follows. We might be about to cause harm to another being, but on considering that we would dislike such harm to befall us, we withdraw from the action. Similarly, we may be on the verge of committing an action, but then recollect that it is not a fitting action for someone who is supposed to be practicing Dharma. Hence, we restrain ourselves from doing it. While riding a horse, it is very important to keep a steady hold on the reins in order to prevent the horse from getting out of control. Likewise, without a sense of self-respect or integrity, our conduct is liable to become chaotic and unrestrained, thus leading us into conflict and suffering. So, can anyone else think of any examples? Maybe you could give an example from your own experience.
I think that was one of the main focuses that I discovered in my winter retreat. That was part of the power of purification for me was so much related to the fact that during the course of my life, in order to satisfy any impulse, any afflictive state of mind that I had, I and I was talking about how to be a good friend to yourself. So I think that this integrity, that you're wanting to hold your deepest values and self-regard and self-respect, and when any type of afflictive state that propels us to do anything else besides hold to those deep values, that's when we just lose it. So I think it's really connected. What's really important? What really sustains your life? What's your form of self-respect? Your dignity? And if that doesn't happen, then the non-virtues are sort of the default mode. At least that was my discovery on and also not really truly being a true friend to myself. I wasn't caring about my own karma. I wasn't caring about my own well-being, either externally or internally. So integrity really keeps that sense of self-care and self-compassion. Keeps it in the mind.
It doesn't really mention avoiding negativity because of thinking this is going to create suffering for myself in the future. This is creating bad karma. It doesn't mention that specifically. It's more like, this just wouldn't be a good thing for me to do. I couldn't live with myself if I did this. I'm just wondering. No, I'm just kind of talking out loud, but in relation to what you said. So I wonder if we think, I'm not going to do this because if I do it, I'll create bad karma and then I'll have suffering in the future. I'm not sure if that's integrity or something else.
The wisdom that knows what's to adopt and abandon.
Wisdom of karma, wisdom of understanding cause and effect. Yeah.
I don't know. You may just have a moment of wisdom coming up.
There's another mental factor coming up later called conscientiousness that's also plays that role of stopping us from doing what is non-virtuous.
Let's say I'm burning a pot or breaking something, and instead of telling anybody I hide it, I put it somewhere else and think. So that would be non-integrity. But integrity towards myself would be then, just going forward and admitting, that I was not mindful enough and burnt the pot and, and take care of it.
Being honest.
Being honest.
Yeah, not hiding things.
It's how we relate to our precepts. Often we're the only ones that know if we kept our precepts. And it's very important to have that sense of integrity. Otherwise, we don't. It's not like we even have precepts if we're not relating to them in that way, where we relate to them, where we don't break them because we don't want to break them, whether anybody else knows it or not, and we confess them whether anybody else knew that we broke them or not.
Yeah, this is actually said to be one of the main mental factors that we need to be able to keep our precepts. Knowing, just having this sense, I'm a nun or I'm a monk and I've taken that precept to not do that action, so it just wouldn't be right, it wouldn't be fitting for me to do that. So, so that would be integrity. Somebody else, but yeah.
I was thinking about the origin story of the first precept, right, where the person who committed he had sex with his wife under family pressure to have an heir. And then later when he goes back, his skin turns sallow, he loses weight, his whole practice goes awry. Then then the monks notice that, and then they ask him why, and then they find out and they tell the Buddha. But it just, it was like, there's a lot of integrity there, I think, right, where he wasn't trying to cover it up. It wasn't something he rejoiced in. It basically destroyed his practice, and he could see the results. And I think in all the origin stories of the Vinaya, no matter what the monastics have done, they were always honest about it when questioned by the Buddha.
Mm. Probably hard to lie in front of the Buddha. I know, but to try to lie. No, I didn't do that in front of the Buddha.
the omniscient one.
But there was the one who didn't confess, remember? And so the Buddha didn't recite the prasada.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that was. Okay, so the next one is somewhat similar. It's called consideration for others. And so when this mental factor is there, we avoid negativity for the sake of others, thinking about others, being considerate of others. And in the text by Yeshe Gelsen, he said, others mainly means our teachers, our spiritual teachers, so mainly in thinking about them. So it enables us to restrain from harmful physical, verbal, and mental actions. It acts as the basis for maintaining pure ethical conduct, prevents others from losing faith in us, and causes joy to arise in the minds of others. So, Geshe says, this mental factor is very similar in nature to self-respect, except that it restrains one from evil through considering that were one to commit a particular action, it would cause disappointment or suffering for others. In general, self-respect and consideration for others are the determining factors whereby people in this world are regarded as being noble or not. They are like a vessel that contains all divine and human virtues, as well as a strong fence that guards them. Nagarjuna once said that there are two things that protect people in the world: self-respect, or integrity, and consideration for others. So it's probably easy to find examples of this. You may feel angry at somebody and have thoughts of saying something out of anger, something hurtful, something nasty. But then if we think of how this would affect them, or if we think of our teacher, what would my teacher think about this? And that stops us from speaking those words. So that would be an example of this one. One thing I've always wondered about is, because in the 8 worldly dharmas, one of the pairs of the 8 worldly dharmas is about reputation, being concerned about what other people think, wanting others to like us and respect us and think that we're wonderful and say good things about us and so on, and not wanting a bad reputation. So it can be a little hard to tell the difference between this mental factor and the 8 worldly dharma of concern about reputation. You ever thought about that? Any ideas how to tell the difference? The 8 worldly dharmas is not a virtue. That's not a virtuous mental factor, whereas this one is.
I think it would depend on who you were being concerned about. Like when it's concerned about reputation, you're thinking about yourself. When it's consideration for others, you're thinking about the others. So your motivation is like almost. I mean, if you can figure out what your motivation is, we don't always know.
Yeah.
But,
Because it does say here that one of the benefits of this is it prevents others from losing faith in us. But then why do we want people to have faith in us? Again, is it because, we want them to like us and respect us and think we're wonderful? Or the more wholesome version of that would be if I'm wearing these robes, I'm representing, Buddhism, the 3 jewels. And if I misbehave and people, think negatively of me, then it reflects badly on the whole of Buddhism, on my teachers and so forth. So it could damage people's faith, and then that would be harmful for them. They might even, completely give up Buddhism, totally lose faith in Buddhism and never want to practice it. So that would be very damaging for them. Yeah, so again, if we're thinking more about them and the harmful effects it would have on them if I were to misbehave, then it's clear that that's not worldly dharma. But I think, yeah, we do have to be mindful. What are we really concerned about there? Is it my reputation, being liked, admired, and so forth, or more concerned about others and about the dharma, the three jewels, and people's faith and confidence in the three jewels? And that comes across in the precepts. When we study the precepts, many of the precepts were established for that reason. You know, that if a monk or nun behaves like that, people will lose respect, people will lose faith, and that's not good for them, and it's not good for Buddhism in general. So that is something we need to be aware of and considerate of. So, another thing to look at with these virtuous mental factors is we probably all have them naturally to a certain extent, but ideally we want to be able to cultivate them so that they're even stronger, more present in our mind. So we could look at how can we cultivate. I mean, with some, we talked already about faith, how to cultivate faith in case we don't have it naturally. But with regard to these two, integrity and consideration for others, how could we cultivate them, build them up, increase them in our mind? Any thoughts?
So with the consideration of others, sometimes when I'm not thinking about others, my energy feels a certain way. How I'm feeling inside, it's kind of a zingy, self-centered-y kind of thing. And then trying to open up my perspective to see how what the action I'm about to do is going to affect everybody around, not just me. And then that helps to bring others into focus, I think.
Yeah, it just occurred to me too that if we look at how we are affected by others, for example, Venerable Sangye talking about seeing Venerable children and how she behaved, and that was such a powerful effect on her. And seeing myself as well, seeing the Tibetans and how they behave. So just to see in ourselves how we feel about the behavior of other people, whether they behave well or they behave badly, and then just think, well, the same happens with other people. I'm not in a vacuum. People notice me. People notice what I'm doing and how I'm behaving. So it does have effects. It could have a beneficial effect or a disastrous effect. So that's, I think, is also helpful to try to be really, practice well. Well, lots of people.
I was thinking about reputation, and I was wondering if a concern for your reputation might actually be a positive starting point. Because it seems to me that if you join a community, let's say a person coming to the Abbey for the first time and wants to possibly become a member, wants to present not falsely, but begin to take up a practice that will have them stand in good stead. And it seems to me that that's a positive starting point. And I'm not saying that's an ultimate motivation, but it seems that a concern for your reputation amongst a group of people who could be your teachers at some point would seem to be a positive thing.
Yeah. But also not just talking about a situation like here, but just in the world in general, concern for reputation, it can stop us from doing really awful things. People who have totally no concern at all for what anybody thinks. Is that like sociopaths, psychopaths? Yeah, no concern at all about what other people think and feel, then that can be really disastrous. So it's better than not having it.
I was thinking about how integrity and consideration are very connected, not just because the one is, about your for personal reasons, and the other is not to harm others. But for me, part of having integrity is not to be inconsiderate of others. Just that's a negative. Being inconsiderate of others is a negativity that I would avoid, that I would consider part of my personal integrity.
Because you wouldn't feel good about yourself. If
Right.
Yeah.
So I think they're very connected.
Yeah. Good point. Tracy?
It's starting to feel like maybe there's something about taking responsibility, either responsibility in a self-respect sense that, what you do, you may let your own self down, or taking responsibility for how you impact others would help support both of those somehow.
Yeah, and that's like, well, I was going to say it's a big part of karma, the whole idea of karma, that we are responsible. What we do makes a difference. What we do has consequences. Usually they talk about it long term, like future lives, but just in the present, here and now, the things that we do have consequences on others and also on ourselves. So just becoming aware of that. Yeah, like you say, taking the responsibility definitely helps.
I think these two mental factors are very involved in helping us to develop valid self-confidence and a sense of ease in our mind. Because no matter what things look like on the outside, we know our motivations. And if we have a genuine good motivation, then we can rest at ease, even if things don't go so well on externally. At the end of the day, we can sleep well because we know we've had a good motivation.
Yeah, I seem to recall the Dalai Lama talking about that, and he gets criticized. There are people who don't like him and criticize him and so on, but, he doesn't seem to be bothered by that because, he's confident that his motivation was good. He was doing what he felt was the right thing to do. So if other people are unhappy about it, well, yeah, so that is very important. And that helps us to overcome that other worldly dharma, that pair of worldly dharma about praise and blame, which we can get really hung up on wanting people to praise us and wanting to avoid blame. Yeah. Okay, then moving on. So the next one is called non-attachment. It says, this is not the mere absence of attachment, but the opposite of it, and the direct antidote to it. Referring to an object in cyclic existence, or it could also just be cyclic existence itself, a whole thing. Non-attachment prevents and counteracts attachment and subdues obsession with attractive objects and people. Okay, so what Geshe-Rapton says, he calls it detachment, but I don't like that term. I think detachment can often have the sense of just being indifferent. So I don't think that conveys the real meaning. But anyway, the explanation is, it's a mental factor that when referring to an object within cyclic existence, it acts as the actual remedy for attachment towards it. Being removed from the object, it remains detached and one doesn't grasp for it. It has the function of preventing attachment and increasing the remedy for it. Attachment is the tendency of the mind that desires to possess a particular object, whether it be animate or inanimate. So it could be persons or it could be computers or whatever. For as long as we allow ourselves to be subjected to its demands, we shall only obtain disappointment and suffering, never the satisfaction that we seek. Thus, non-attachment is the opposite of attachment. It withdraws us from a compulsive involvement with the object through an understanding of its true nature. Thereby, it eliminates the grasping and clinging to possess. Being under the influence of attachment, we find ourselves driven here and there in the pursuit of transient pleasures lacking any real value. With non-attachment, though, we are able to see more clearly and objectively, and thereby focus our attention and energy on the accomplishment of truly worthwhile aims. Yeah, so it's not just an absence of attachment or desire. Because, for example, if you've just eaten a big meal and your stomach's totally full, and then somebody offers you a piece of cake, you might think, no. No attachment arises at that moment. But I don't think that's non-attachment. Because maybe a few hours later, that piece of cake is still around. You know, you get very attached to it. So it's when we really understand the disadvantages, the shortcomings of objects that we could be attached to, and that, you know, that understanding is very strong in our minds. So we just have no interest. For example, probably most of us, you know, if we're in town and we walk past a bar and it's full of people, you know, drinking, probably we don't feel the slightest interest. Unless you had a really, you know, long-term habit of going into bars and drinking, you might still feel some tug, you know, go back to that old habit. But probably most of us, especially those of us who've been ordained for quite a while, not the slightest interest. So it's not even a temptation. So I think that would be an example of non-attachment, just zero attachment there. So I think non-attachment comes from wisdom, from having really thought about, meditated on, and come to understand the faults, the disadvantages of samsara and samsaric objects. And that's firm enough in our mind that we're just not interested. And in the mental factor text of Geshe Gyaltsen, if you have that open, page, what page is it? 37. Well, a little further down, page 37, he mentions, the heading says, discussion of the three, non-attachment, non-hatred, and non-ignorance. And then he mentions three kinds of non-attachment. The first is non-attachment to this life. One's mind having turned away from this life to seek the purpose of future lives. This is the attitude of a being of small scope. So in the Lam Rim, we have these three scopes. So the small scope being is, you know, not attached to the mere pleasures and happiness of this life. The second is non-attachment to all the marvels of cyclic existence. Having turned away from one's depths, from adherence, is the attitude of a being of the intermediate scope. So that's renunciation, when we've just clearly seen there's nothing in samsara that really brings us happiness and pleasure. So you're just totally non-attached to anything in samsara. And the third, non-attachment to the extremes of both cyclic existence and solitary peace. Solitary peace meaning like the attainment of nirvana or liberation just for oneself, not concern for others. And seeking non-abiding nirvana, which is another term for Buddhahood. This is the attitude of a being of great scope. So there's 3 different levels of non-attachment related to the 3 different scopes of the Lam Rim. Kunga.
So this mental factor is different than having actually eliminated attachment, the seeds of attachment in the mind. This is, you can still have the seeds of attachment, but also cultivate this particular mental factor to override
Yeah,
it.
because you don't eliminate the seeds of attachment until path of seeing. That's when you have the direct realization of emptiness. So that's quite a high achievement. So until that time, yeah, there's still seeds of attachment, and there's still, well, it depends on where you are in your practice, attachment might still arise, but we need to counteract it by meditating on the faults. There's all kinds of meditations, like on the faults of samsaric objects. Impermanence, I find impermanence really helpful. Just to understand that things don't last, pleasure doesn't last, samsara doesn't last. So there's different antidotes that you meditate on to increase non-attachment, and that, so even if attachment is still there, seeds of attachment are still there, this is sort of putting a damper on it, not allowing it to grow.
It seems like it would be a crucial mental factor in the generation of renunciation of determination to be free, almost one of the initial steps to really get to that unceasingly day and night, without respite, thinking about freeing oneself, is to get into not being interested in any of the marvels of cyclic existence, having turned away from one's depths. I mean, it's really close to being there, or one of the factors crucial for that.
Yeah. I mean, renunciation doesn't just suddenly pop up in our mind without cultivating the causes for it. So this would be one of the causes. But to cultivate this, we have to meditate on the disadvantages, the faults of samsara, and all the pleasures, the beauties, the wonderful marvels of samsaric existence, which is not that easy. I mean, even to be unattached to the things of this world. I mean, this world is, pretty lousy compared to the upper realms. It's like a pig pen compared to the... Sorry, no offense to the pigs, but I mean, that's what I think. When we look at a pig pen and we look at these pigs in there and they're rolling around in the mud and they're eating garbage, we feel, ugh. We have no interest at all in joining them. So I tend to think the beings in the upper realms, the form realm, if they look at us and what we're doing down here, it's probably similar. So to be to have non-attachment to those pleasures, and not so easy. That's why they say when you develop calm abiding, you have to be very careful, because you can get attached to that bliss and stuck in that. So the next is non-hatred. This is the opposite of animosity. It is love and benevolence, not just the absence of anger and ill will. Now, so you could be non-angry, like right now, I don't feel angry at Venerable Tsepel, but that doesn't necessarily... No, but, if she does something after class that annoys me, anger could come up. So it isn't just the absence of anger and ill will, but it's the opposite of that. It's actual love, loving kindness, and benevolence. When referring to someone who harms us, the harm itself, or the cause of the harm, it has the characteristic of love and directly overcomes anger and hatred. It's the basis for the prevention of anger and the increase of love, benevolence, forgiveness, and fortitude. So Geshe Rabten says, pretty much the same. So there are 3 specific objects mentioned. One is somebody who actually harms us. The second is the harm itself, I don't know what would be an example of that, but physical pain, yeah, because that's not really necessarily caused by somebody else, but yeah, having a tummy ache or a headache. And the third is the cause or instrument of harm. Sometimes people get angry when they stub their toe. You know, you're walking and you stub your toe on a rock or something, and you can feel angry at that rock. What's that doing there? Who put that there? So that would be an example of that. So examples are thorns, poisons, weapons, and so forth. So upon recognizing one of these three things as the cause of our suffering, we tend to dislike the thing and subsequently become angry towards it. This anger immediately causes agitation and tension in the mind that leads only to irrational and uncontrolled behavior. I remember reading about this guy, and I think he was in Colorado, and he was having problems with his computer, and he took it out in the backyard and started shooting it. So I think that's a good example of irrational and uncontrolled behavior. And there's another story about some lady in Europe somewhere, and she got mad because of all the stupid programs on TV. And so she threw the TV out the window, and she was on I don't know how many stories up an apartment building, and there were people down below. So I think she was arrested. Nobody got hurt, but still, this is crazy. Why be angry at the TV? It's not the fault of the TV. They have stupid programs. So anyway, this is what can happen with anger. We become irrational. So non-hatred is the opposite response. Without blindly reacting to the situation, it maintains a clarity of mind characterized by love, kindness, and patient acceptance. It is a positive mental factor that, upon cultivation, will eradicate the negative factors of anger and hatred. Attachment and hatred are like boiling water in the mind. Non-attachment and non-hatred are similar to cold water that, when poured into the boiling water, has the function of calming and cooling the afflictions of attachment and hatred. So there's lots of methods, lots of meditations to help us overcome anger, reduce our anger. Venable's book, Working with Anger, and Dalai Lama's book, Healing Anger, Shantideva, of course, chapter 6. So lots of antidotes to anger. And then we can also work on cultivating loving kindness, so meditating on metta. Because if there's already anger in the mind, it can be very hard to just suddenly switch 180 degrees and have loving kindness. So we need methods to cool down the anger. But it does help. It does help to familiarize ourselves with loving kindness. So if we're very, very familiar with loving kindness, we might be able to make that switch quite quickly. Has anyone had that experience? Yeah? Like your story of the guy in the airport. Yeah, so that would be a situation where one could easily become angry and antagonistic and maybe say something nasty in return to them. But if you're very familiar with the faults of anger and how you don't really want to get angry, that's not nice, and very familiar with the opposite of anger, then it's not too difficult to change the mind, even on the spot like that.
Just if you carry it through, every moment of your life, and then something occurs, then the possibility to remain in that state of mind that is quite positive is quite high. That's my experience.
It's familiarity. I mean, the way the mind works, what comes up in the mind is what we are most familiar with. So if we're very familiar with anger, that'll pop up very quickly and easily. But if we're very familiar with kindness and compassion and love and patience, then that's what will arise more easily and naturally. So that's what meditation is all about, making ourselves familiar with these positive states of mind, positive qualities. So the more we do that, the more they'll be right there, just ready to come up.
For me, the other positive and powerful experience is living in community here over the years. And when my mind is out of control and I'm angry at whatever, and the people around me just give me space and they don't judge. And over time, that really had a huge effect on me. And then I would notice when sometimes I, in the past, would get angry at something, I wouldn't want to because of how it would affect the other people. So it was very supportive and helpful to live in a environment where there wasn't a lot of judgment and anger back.
It makes it a lot easier to be that way. But then when you're in ordinary environments with ordinary people, are you able to maintain that, to continue that? I mean, if people around you are angry and agitated and complaining and blaming, can you still maintain that?
I mean, that fellow at the airport,
Mm.
that was a good example of even 5 years ago, I would have said something pretty snarky, and I didn't. So I think, over time it works and affects. Yeah.
Yeah, again, I guess it's just habit. If you build up that kind of habit here in this kind of situation, then it becomes your way of being. And then it's easier to be that way, even in other places with other people.
As a habit, I think it just becomes clear to us that that's not how we want to be. Like, that we don't want to be angry. So I think for me, that's part of the habit of thinking when I'm starting to have anger come up. It's like, oh, that's not where I want to go.
That's your integrity.
So I think there's some debate as to whether there are times when anger is actually a positive motivation. And I'm not sure your views on that. In the sense of, is it possible that anger could be righteous anger rather than self-righteous anger? And that energy could be a motivating factor if one had appropriate self-control to use that anger as a stimulus to do something skillful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, over the last couple of years, there's been things from the Dalai Lama. There's a book called Beyond Religion. I don't know if you've seen that book. It just came out a few years ago. There's a whole section in there about disturbing emotions. And then there he says, anger, attachment, fear are not necessarily negative. It depends on the circumstances, it depends on the intensity, the appropriateness, and so forth. And I can't remember whether he gives examples or not, but somebody told me a story. This person was present at a meeting of Nobel laureates, Nobel Peace Prize laureates. So the Dalai Lama was there, and many other prize recipients were there. And he was giving a talk about anger and how it's so bad and it's so nothing good about it and so on and so forth. And this woman afterwards, stood up and said, I'm sorry, Your Holiness, but I don't agree with you because she had won the Nobel Peace Prize for starting this organization to get rid of landmines. And she said, I got so angry about landmines blowing up and killing people and maiming people, including children. I was so angry about that. I decided to do something about it. She started this organization that has done incredible work to get rid of landmines. She said, if I hadn't gotten angry about that, I wouldn't have done the work that I did. So I can't help but wonder if, maybe that and maybe some other meetings with scientists and so on, that His Holiness has maybe changed, gone away a little bit from the traditional Buddhist view. I mean, you could argue and say, well, it doesn't have to be anger. It could be compassion. It could be compassion. But the thing is, if we're just ordinary beings, we're not yet bodhisattvas, we're not yet free of our anger. We do still have anger. We do get angry about these kind of things, that at least we can put that anger to good use. Use it, put that energy. There's a lot of energy there. We can put that energy into something constructive rather than destructive. So that's how I think. I mean, ideally, it's best not to have anger, It is disturbing and harmful, and it can lead to suffering, and it's an obstacle to progressing on the path. So that's the ideal thing, is to not have it. But if we still have it, we're not free of it yet, we can use it for good. And there was an article somebody sent me recently. It's kind of in relation to all these scandals that have happened in the Buddhist world, but His Holiness was saying, if there's things that are going on that are wrong and they're bad, you should say something. You should, almost like it's compassionate, to get angry and upset about this and do something about it. Not just go out and do something negative, but, do things to bring about change. So there may be different opinions about that, but I'm kind of thankful for His Holiness saying that, because otherwise it can sound like anger is totally bad in every circumstance. You should never get angry. And then, you feel kind of really bad and ashamed and But I think it is helpful to know that, okay, you can put that energy to good use.
This also comes down to a language change, in that the anger that we're defining is its basis is that you're being irrational, and that you're not able to think clearly. Like someone who has this kind of anger as a propelling force for, say, for instance, starting this initiative to end landmines, wouldn't be able to carry that out under the force of the anger we are defining.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be that initial moment was like, oh, I'm outraged, but the very next moment that was progressive and productive must have been something more along the lines of what we would call compassion. Or
Yeah, and Venerable Chunyi was talking about this too, because I think she met, maybe, were you with her as well? She went to Spokane to some kind of conference and met this guy who was from Coeur d'Alene, somewhere in Idaho, and he was really angry about, like, the, what's that group? Aryan Nation and other similar groups, and he really, has been working for decades to get them out, get them out of Idaho, get them out of wherever they are, and, that kind of thing. So Venerable Chunyi said, he said it was anger that was motivating him, but she felt it was really compassion, that these people were doing horrible things, awful things, and, not wanting to just sit there and be passive and do nothing, but we have to do something about it. But yeah, we do need, because anger can make our mind a bit crazy and irrational and uncontrolled, like it says here. So we do need to be able to cool it down enough so that we can think rationally. Okay, what can I do that won't break the law, that won't be unethical, but still bring about a change, a positive change?
Maybe the way to do a litmus test between the two, the good anger or the bad anger, is to just ask intent towards the object, because there's always an object in relation to, like you were saying. So if your intent towards the object is like I want to help sentient beings, and you are feeling anger, don't worry about the anger. You got the right intent. But if you are noticing an idea of harm coming towards because a lot of that's the problem with anger, is it's the wrong kind, is very self-centered, and it intends to protect yourself and or possibly harm another in the interest of that self-protection. And on the idea of how to work on an antidote with anger, something that's working for me a little better is a lot of times I get angry when I feel people have done something negative towards me. But if I can have a little more confidence and self-awareness of who and what I actually am. Venerable Children once said, look, if somebody tells you your nose is blue and you know it's not, you don't take offense. And so I think of it like I can leave the turd where it lays on the floor. I don't need to stick my fingers in that because I know it's just not true. So this has been super helpful. Like, for me, this helps. This is like why I can keep myself from going there. I can catch the moment when I'm about to engage because I've been offended, and I cannot end up there by being like, this isn't true. Or if it is true, then I have to do some looking at what they're saying.
Yeah, one of my teachers, one Geshe, once said that, if we are criticized, there's really no reason to be upset about it. Because if we look at what they're saying and check if it's true, if what they're saying is true, and we really want to improve ourselves and work on ourselves, then we should think, well, okay, this person is pointing out something I need to look at and work on, so that's helpful, and they're like a teacher. On the other hand, if what they're saying is not true, then it's like nonsense. It's like saying you have horns on your head or you have a blue nose, or it's meaningless. It doesn't apply. So why get upset about it? So, yeah, I thought that's a really helpful advice. If you have the clarity of mind to be able to think that way, is this true or not? But yeah, it's very, very helpful. And yeah, one thing that His Holiness said in that book and elsewhere is, he said, anger isn't necessarily bad. It depends on, what you do with it and so on. But he said hatred, he makes a distinction between anger and hatred. He said, and hatred is never positive. So I guess hatred isn't always so clearly defined, but I guess it's more long-term and deep, and, people can be stuck in hatred their whole life, hating somebody and never wanting to get out of that, never wanting to change that. Whereas anger can be something that is very transitory. It comes and goes. You're angry 1 minute, and an hour later you're over it. So it's more temporary. But yeah, there's different degrees of anger too. Like full-blown anger is where you would want to hurt. You want to do something harmful. But if you can stop it before it gets to that point, then it's just, this is not right. I have to do something about this. What can I do? Bring in your intelligence and rational thinking and figure out a solution. It doesn't involve harm or anything illegal or unethical. It's possible.
I've been saying this, I've been thinking also about the aspect, I kind of agree with Matt, like how we're using the word anger, the aspect of what is being superimposed and projected for like the one who's working against the landmines. I would think that the energy that she's calling anger, which even could be anger, I don't care to debate that, but it might not be superimposing or putting any projection of anything that doesn't exist there. She might be quite accurate about what's going on. I don't know. I mean, it seems like we have to discern some different kinds of anger.
Yeah, I think it's anger that innocent people are being killed and harmed and unnecessarily. And, this must stop. And I'm going to do something about it. So I think there's a lot of compassion there. Compassion and kindness. Well, I think there can be anger. He probably was, furious, but then, transformed that into constructive activity. And apparently, yeah. I mean, she won the Nobel Prize. She must have done amazing things.
Twice now you've said not doing things that are illegal. And I was just thinking about civil disobedience.
Yeah, Gandhi.
And I was just puzzled if,
Well, I guess what I meant was not murdering.
Oh.
That happens sometimes, people who are anti-abortion, will go and murder a doctor who's doing abortions or blow up the clinic. That's what I meant. But yeah, civil disobedience, that's something else. Like people would allow themselves to be arrested and go to jail, but they were nonviolent. I mean, the stories I've heard about, they weren't doing anything violent. They were just doing something
illegal
against the law, yeah, and willing to go to jail for that. So I guess, yeah, I guess I was thinking more harmful things that are actually causing harm and suffering to others, like murder. Or I remember this story too of these animal rights people somewhere in the Midwest who went into a mink farm and opened all the cages and let the minks, out. And minks are apparently really vicious animals. So all these minks were let free in the forest. And I mean, that wasn't a good thing to do. I mean, because it was illegal, yes, but also just in consideration of the other animals in that area. So that wasn't I don't think that was such a smart thing to do. Maybe it would have been better to buy the minks and then bring them home and take care of them and not let them get killed. That's what we do in Singapore. We buy these animals that are going to be slaughtered, and then a lot of people, also in the West, they have animal sanctuaries. Yeah, so animals that are going to be slaughtered, that are going to be killed, they buy them, rescue them, bring them to a animal sanctuary where they can just live out their life in peace and not have to be killed in a horrible way. So that's what I was trying to talk about. Like, whatever you do, try to use wisdom and compassion and ethics as much as possible.
I think anger can be such a it can create a lot of confusion in our minds and can make us not think clearly to the point where we may have a good motivation for wanting to do something, but we're also angry about it, like it's a good motivation to want to remove landmines, but then there's this anger about that they're there in the first place and all the damage they're doing. And that anger can be so clouding in the mind that the person doesn't see that that's not the initial motivation. That the anger is a frustration that's there. And it might be causing some action. I got to do something to get rid of my anger. But the real motivation is the compassion. But I think that can be confused a lot just because the anger can be so obscuring of everything else.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, the ideal way would be not to have anger, but to have other qualities, wisdom, compassion, and so on, and non-attachment. Because also, if we're angry and we engage in some kind of activity to bring about a change, we may be attached to certain results. And if the results don't turn out the way we want them to, we could get angry again. And yeah, so there's those kind of dangers that can come up. So yeah, it would be best not to have anger in the first place. But like I said, if we are just ordinary beings who do have anger, we can't just totally stop having it. At least if it does come up in those kind of circumstances, we can do whatever we can to use it in constructive ways, positive ways. And it does seem the Dalai Lama is very in favor of that. He's very, talks a lot about social action and not just sitting on our meditation cushion and meditating on compassion when, there is something that could be done to bring about a change. But try to do it in a non-angry, non-harmful way. Yeah.
So there in number 5 here, non-hatred, it's really posing love and benevolence as being the opposite of hatred, but not mentioning compassion. Because love is the desire for someone to have happiness and its causes, but compassion is the desire for someone to be free of suffering and its causes. So
That's a later mental factor.
okay.
Non-harmfulness comes
Okay,
down
yeah.
at the bottom of the list.
Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, I think if we cultivate compassion, we're more familiar with compassion, that would also be an antidote to anger and hatred. Because if we really have strong compassion, we wouldn't want to hurt anybody, even if they're doing awful things, but we would feel, no, I don't really want to hurt that person. I just want to stop them from doing these harmful things. So do you want to do one more, or do you want to stop? Huh? Just one more. Okay. Non-confusion. So these are the three nons. I call them the three nons. They're opposite to the three poisons. Non-attachment, non-hatred, non-confusion, or could also be called non-ignorance. So this is the opposite of confusion, arising from an inborn disposition and nurtured by study, reflection, and meditation. It acts as a remedy for confusion and ignorance and accompanies the firm wisdom that thoroughly analyzes the specific meanings of an object. It prevents confusion, increases the 4 types of wisdom or understanding, and helps to actualize constructive qualities. So it's not wisdom itself. It's a different mental factor, but it's said to accompany wisdom. So I'll just read what Geshe Rapton says. He calls it non-bewilderment. It's a clarity and sharpness of mind that dispels bewilderment about a particular object. Bewilderment is like the darkness in a room, and non-bewilderment is like the light that clears it away. It itself is not a form of wisdom, but is a lucid quality of mind, accompanying the firm wisdom that bears a relationship of similarity with either enthusiasm or concentration. So it means it's accompanies, or it's in the same retinue with enthusiasm or concentration. Most of us are born with a certain degree of non-bewilderment inherited from previous wholesome activities. Nevertheless, for it to aid us in gaining liberation, it is a quality that needs to be heightened and developed, firstly through learning and study, subsequently through reflection and meditation. So we have it already naturally, but to cultivate it further, develop it further, we need to do what we're doing here, learning, studying, learning as much as we can about the Dharma, thinking about it, discussing it, so we have a better understanding, and then meditating on what we have learned. So through those that threefold process, hearing, thinking, and meditating, our non-confusion grows, and that's something that accompanies wisdom. I find it a little hard to identify this, maybe because my mind is so confused much of the time, but but to be able to see the difference between this and wisdom or intelligence. But yeah, sometimes there's moments of clarity. Ha, right? When you get something. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop there, and then next week we can try to finish the rest of the virtuous mental factors. So I like to think every sentient being has all of these, at least in seed form, because we've had them in past lives, or even, for example, the cats. They have the seeds for these virtuous mental factors, and they may not be able to experience them. I don't think they could have faith, for example, when they see us and they are happy to see us and so on. It's probably not faith. Faith in the 3 jewels. Probably not. It's probably more, attachment. But the seeds are there, and at least in this lifetime, they are having imprints. They're hearing Dharma and mantras and so forth, and seeing Buddhas and seeing robes. So that's leaving imprints on their mind that hopefully in a future life will ripen and enable them to be in a better situation as a human being, so that they can develop their qualities even more.